Today we have Michael Tanner joining us from the Cato Institute. He's a senior fellow there. He does policy research on lots of different things, including social security and social welfare policy. According to Times Magazine, he's one of the architects of the private accounts movement, and he's talking to us about Going for Broke, his book, Deficits, Debts, and the Entitlement Crisis. Help me welcome him.
Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your having me down here today. Appreciate you giving me the chance to come down to New Orleans to begin with, which is always great. I always like it here. Not that I let it necessarily go to your head, because I both live and work in Washington, D.C., so I'm always kind of thrilled to be someplace else. And I'm a little surprised that they're actually letting me talk to you over a meal, because I'm not usually very good for the appetite. And I don't want to say that my talks are usually depressing, but I've noticed that they start taking away your belts and shoelaces before they let you come in. So actually, given that you've got a meal in front of you and everything, and I'm going to try and do something a little different today. So bear with me on this. I'm going to try and give a more positive, upbeat talk if I can. So I'm going to try and sort of focus on the good news, if I can do that. And so it may break down in places because I'm not really used to doing that, but I'll try, and we'll see how that goes. So let's start off the talk today, if I can, right away with some really good news. And that is that last year, the federal deficit was $430-odd billion. Now, no, that actually is good news. I mean, that really is. Because if you want to look at it, I mean, you can look at you can look at the fact that just a few years ago, we had deficits of $1.4 trillion. And so bringing it down, to just 400-odd billion, that's really progress. I mean, that's taking some work. And how did it come down? Well, actually it wasn't a whole lot of work, because a lot of sort of one-time spending was included in that 1.4 trillion that's sort of gone away. For example, you may remember TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. There was a whole bunch of spending that went with that. That portion of TARP that was going to be paid back has largely been paid back. So that money has come in. And of course, only in Washington, you might think that if they repaid the money from TARP, that would be revenue when it's repaid that the government would have. Actually, in Washington, that's considered negative spending. So only in Washington can you go out and spend negatively. So you might try that sometime, when you're a little low on beer money or something. You can try working that out. But that got rid of some money. There was the stimulus bill. You all remember the $800 billion stimulus that was so politically dynamic. A lot of fighting over that. There was actually not just one, but there was 5 separate stimulus bills. That was over the course of about 18 months between the Bush administration and the Obama administration. And they were about $1.5 trillion, a little bit more than that in total cost for those 5 stimulus bills. Well, that money's all been spent. They're done with that. They've sort of found all the shovel-ready projects that they were going to find, and they spent that money. So that got being spent this year, and that comes out as the budget comes down. We also had, until fairly recently, we had the sequester. You may have heard that. That was when they put caps on domestic discretionary and defense discretionary spending and limited how much they could grow. They're still growing, by the way. There was no actual cuts, but they limited the rate of growth for both domestic discretionary and defense spending. And that reduced spending over that period of time, or at least relative to economic growth. We've also seen a little bit of an uptick in revenue because we're out of the recession. This may be a very slow recovery, but it is a recovery. So from the trough of the recession, we brought in a little more revenue through that. And finally, there was a tax increase as part of the budget deal a couple of years ago. They made the lower portion of the Bush tax cuts permanent. They basically did away with the top portion of the Bush tax cuts, and that also brought in all the revenue, about 1% of GDP. And so you put all that together, it brings the budget deficit down to $1.4 trillion to about $400 billion. And they are just thrilled with this in Washington. They are dislocating their shoulder, patting themselves on the back here. They are so excited that they've managed to accomplish this. I mean, Paul Krugman says the deficit problem's been mostly solved. In fact, if you're fans of Krugman, you know that he writes that particular column every second Tuesday in the New York Times. But he's very much convinced that we don't have a deficit problem anymore. Another very influential columnist, Matt Iglesias, who writes for Vox, he actually says the deficit's now too low. And he's really worried for the future of our economy if we don't hurry up and get that deficit back up again. So he thinks that we've got a real problem with a low deficit. One of my favorite quotes was when the president introduced his budget last time. He did a briefing for the Washington Post, and they said that the new budget, the fact that we had the deficit under control now, meant that the age of austerity was over. Now maybe you could actually help me out on this, because I may have blinked and missed that age of austerity when it went by. So if any of you actually noticed an age of austerity, if after this you would come up and let me know when it was, just so that I have it on record someplace. I've been busy looking for it on milk cartons and stuff. It's just somehow slipped right by me. But we now don't have to have an age of austerity because, of course, we've whipped the deficit, and that's been totally solved. With one small problem. That is, we haven't really solved the deficit problem. We were in a sort of a very temporary respite. And if you actually want to see where the deficit is going, you can just look over here. This is where it was last year. We hit down to 430-odd billion. This year, we're back up already to $550 billion deficit this year. So it's going to be about 120 billion higher. And you can see that coming out in the future, it just gets higher and higher. I mean, it just goes straight back up again. And in fact, in just 6 years, by 2022, just 6 years from now, we'll be back to trillion-dollar deficits every year from here on out. As far as the eye can see, we're going to be back to trillion-dollar deficits again. So clearly, we haven't quite solved that problem. And you can see the trajectory is just going up. You might say, well, maybe we're reaching another peak and it comes back down again. No such luck. This is projected deficits from the Congressional Budget Office going forward. This was the previous high. This is where we got down last year to the low, and you can just see where it goes up from there. Now, obviously, projections are just that. They're projections. I don't see us ever having a $10 trillion budget deficit in any given year. These, by the way, are all inflation-adjusted dollars. They're all in 2015 dollars. So it's not inflation is building a $10 trillion deficit. That's just what it would be under these projections. But we won't get there because the economy will collapse long before that ever happens. So we don't have to worry about that. But still, you can see we're headed on that kind of trajectory. And the deficit, a lot of people get confused with the deficit and the debt. The deficit is how much we overspend this year. And frankly, deficits aren't the end of the world if you have one once in a while. I prefer a balanced budget. I generally believe you shouldn't spend more than you take in. But look, everybody does, right? Now, if you look at your budget, there are weeks when you spend a little bit more than you have in income. And that's why God invented credit cards, right? And if every so often you do that, you got a hot date or something, and you can run up a little extra money, great. But if you do that every week, and every month, and every year, then you got a real problem. And the same thing is true with the federal budget. If, maybe we've got a little war, or we've got a recession or something, for some reason we're going to tick up a little bit into a deficit. Okay, but if that keeps going on year after year after year, it begins to add up into a real problem. And if the deficit is 1 year's profligacy, if you will, then all the year's profligacy combined is the federal debt. And this is where the federal debt is going. Again, in constant 2015 dollars, right now we have a federal debt of about a little over $19 trillion, about $19.2 trillion. And just to kind of put that in perspective, that is 102% of gross domestic product. So we actually owe now more as a country than the value of everything we produce in in this country over the course of a year. It's a little bit as if your credit card bills now exceed your pre-tax salary. At that point, you got to do something about it, and you can see where it's going to go in the future. And once again, not to worry. Long before we get to $180 trillion debt, the economy will collapse, and we'll look a little bit like Zimbabwe running around with shopping carts full of money or something. So it'll be kind of a mess long before then. But that's sort of where we're going. And I want to put this a little bit in perspective, if I could, because think about the euro. We hear constantly about the European debt crisis, with Greece and those irresponsible French people, and spending all that money. And thank God we're not like that. Well, let's actually look at where we stand in respect to this. Here's the United States right here. Well, okay, yeah, Greece is worse off than us. Yay. But look, we're worse off than France. We're in worse shape than Great Britain. Much worse than Germany. In fact, we are actually worse than the average for the EU. So when you hear about the European debt crisis, think about the fact that the United States is actually more in debt than Europe. When you look at the average amount of debt per country. So clearly, if they're a model of fiscal irresponsibility, where are we when you start looking at that? Well, I'm sorry. That's about it for good news. I've been positive and upbeat as long as I can. I'm going to have to revert back to the bad news now. Because for all those numbers, that really is the good news. The real problem is actually much worse than the numbers I just gave you. And let me explain that. Essentially, when in the government they talk about debt, there are three types of debt that we have to consider. The first of these is debt held by the public. And that's government bonds that are out there that people buy and own, and basically, the public, to a large extent, is regular people like you. If you've ever had a 401k or something, and you've had money invested in it, or your folks got a pension that's invested in bonds, some part of it, then that's the public. If you bought a savings bond when you were a kid, that's the public. But about 40% of that debt is actually held by foreign countries. The two largest of those, Japan and China, each hold about 9% of that debt. That debt, economists kind of worry about debt held by the public a lot. Kind of the most serious type of debt, and for several reasons. One is it's actually held by somebody, and that means that somebody actually has a claim on that debt. It's going to come due at some point, and when it comes due, you have to make good on those bonds. Now, in reality, we don't. We actually issue other bonds and we roll that debt over and so on. But theoretically, at least, someone has a claim on that debt, so it makes it a very real form of debt. The second is, if they want you to buy those bonds, they have to pay you interest on those bonds. You have to go out and there's an auction, you have to actually bid on interest on those bonds to get you to buy them. And right now, it's true that interest is very low. People are basically willing to lend us money at absurdly low rates because, well, where else are they going to put it? The euro is not the best investment right now. Nobody's particularly interested in stocking their money away in rubles. The renminbi is not burning up the markets these days. We're the fastest horse in the glue factory. So, where's this money going to, where are they going to put it? They put it in us. They give it to us, and we don't have to pay them a whole lot to do it. So we're right now about 1.2 to 1.4% interest that we're paying on these bonds, which is much lower than the historic rates. Historically, we paid 4 to 5%. We're down to 1.1, 1.2 right now. Even so, that's a heck of a lot of interest payments. if you want to actually look at where interest payments are right now, we're paying every year, the federal government's paying about $200 billion in interest payments on the debt. And when you think about it, interest payments don't buy you anything. I mean, that's just, that's just paying off the investors who hold the bonds. It's not actually buying you something. Whether you're a liberal and you want to put money into a social program or education or something, or you're conservative and you want to buy tanks and planes, you don't get either of them for the interest you pay on the debt. That's just the money that's going out. It's a credit card. When you have to pay that 16, 17% interest on your credit card, you're just making the banks rich. You're not actually getting anything in exchange for it. And look where that's projected to grow. As the budget deficits grow in the future, back to that $1 trillion, the amount of debt of interest we're going to have to pay is going to go up. And in 10 years, just 10 years, we'll be paying $800 billion a year in interest payments. That's almost, just under $1 trillion. I think the whole federal budget right now is about $4 trillion. 22% of that, maybe 23% of that is going to go to interest payments. Think of how that squeezes out every other priority that the government may want to do. And finally, we worry a lot about debt held by the public, and this is debt that the government competes with the private sector over. Now, that's not as big a problem right now because interest rates are very low and there's a lot of money sloshing around in the economy. We've got QE 462 or whatever it is right now. But in general, in the past and probably in the future, what happens is when the federal government goes out and borrows that money, that's not money that's not available for the private sector to go out and borrow. You have to bid against the federal government, pay higher interest rates, and have more difficulty trying to get that money if you want to have money in order to expand your business or to hire more workers or whatever it is. So we get lower employment, we get less economic growth, we get less general wealth in the economy as these interest rates, as the debt held by the public goes up. And right now, debt held by the public is just under about $14 trillion, which is the highest level it's been since World War II, or immediately after World War II, the aftermath. Second type of debt the government has is what's called intergovernmental debt. And this is debt that one part of the government owes another part of the government. Essentially, these are government trust funds. And you've all heard about the Social Security Trust Fund. That's the one everybody talks about. But there's actually over 100 of these trust funds, right, in the government. There's a Medicare trust fund. There's a highway trust fund that your gas tax is supposed to go into. There's a Gulf oil spill trust fund. There's all sorts of trust funds that are out there. They all operate pretty much the same way, in which basically the government, these trust funds, the government buys bonds in them, and the government's the debt that someday we have to be paid back. Now, this debt's a little bit different than debt held by the public because since the government's holding its own debt, it can play more games with actually how it's going to pay it back. But it does have to pay it someday. I mean, if it's going to make good, for example, on Social Security benefits, it's going to have to keep all the bonds in the Social Security Trust Fund. There's $2.9 trillion worth of bonds in the Social Security Trust Fund. Eventually, the government's going to have to pay them off if it wants to pay Social Security benefits. And it has to pay interest on these bonds, just like with regular bonds, except that unlike regular bonds where there's a bidding war, there's sort of an auction on what the interest can change, the government can set the interest on what it is going to pay on these bonds. And it also pays them in bonds. It's sort of like having an IOU and paying the interest on it by writing another IOU. But so it's a little bit less serious that way. And of course, there's no competition with the private sector. The government can issue as many. These are special interest bonds. They're not traded in the open market. The government can issue as many as it wants, and it won't affect the credit of private companies. So this is a little less serious than debt held by the public, but it's still pretty solid. And right now, we have a little over $5 trillion in this intergovernmental debt. Now, if you add those two together, the intergovernmental debt and the debt held by the public, that's where you get your $19 trillion national debt. So when you see someone talking about the national debt in the press or the politicians or whatever, they're saying $19 trillion national debt, that's what they're talking about, a combination of debt held by the public plus intergovernmental debt, those two combined. But there's a third type of debt that's out there that you really need to pay attention to. And that is the implicit debt, or the unfunded obligations, or the unfunded liabilities of programs like Social Security and Medicare going forward. Now, in these programs, we can sort of project into the future how much they're going to cost. We know roughly, let's say, how many people are going to be retired in a given year. And we know what the law says their benefits are supposed to be. So we know how much they're going to cost in each year going out. We also know roughly how much money is going to come in a given year, because we can tell how many people should be working, what their wages will be. We know what the tax rate is on the two of them. This, by the way, is an Arkansas PowerPoint. Anyway, there's a gap between what's coming in and what's going out. And that gap is the unfunded liabilities of the program, or the implicit debt of the program. And those implicit debts are huge. Social Security's implicit debt is around $26 trillion. And that's the good news, because Medicare is in worse shape than that. Its implicit debt is around $40 trillion. I'm sorry, is that a question?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So we've got those unfunded obligations. Clearly that's debt, right? We will owe that money. But I don't understand the time span over which that's calculated.
Very good question. That is the discounted present value of an infinite horizon. So essentially what it means, if we took that, say, the 26 trillion for Social Security, we had 26 trillion socked it away in a bank account today that earned 3% interest, it's discounted at a 3% rate. And then it would be able to pay that unfunded liability forever. So, because money, 200 years from now is obviously now worth, the same value as money next week. So you discount the value of that at a 3% rate, sort of going forward forever. Then there's also some unfunded civil service pensions and a few other things that's thrown in there. But it ends up being around $69 trillion in unfunded liabilities for the federal government. You add that to the $19 trillion federal debt, and we're up around $88 trillion or so. Talking real money. And all of that assumes that a number of good things happen. For example, there's no extension in life expectancy. We assume we all continue to die early. Other good news. We assume that there's no wars in the next 30 years, or the next, or so. We assume that we have no major natural disasters. It assumes that healthcare costs stay low. They're at a 10-year historic low until this year when they actually kicked up a little bit. But so basically, what we're looking at is the potential for this to be 100, 120 trillion if any of those things go wrong. We're talking about real debt going forward at this point. That, by the way, turns out to be about 500. The 9 trillion is about 500% of GDP, so about 5 times more than the value of everything produced in this country. We want to pay it off. So what do we do about it? You've got more money going out than you've got coming in. This really shouldn't be rocket science, except to Washington. But you have more money going out than you have coming in. So what are we going to do? You've got a couple of choices out there. Number one, you can try to bring in more money. You've got more going out than you got coming in, bring in more. So we could raise taxes. And you hear sort of one side of the political debate talks a lot about that. Now, they do talk a lot about it, but they never really want to raise taxes on, say, you folks. What they really want to talk about is they want to raise taxes just a little bit on the rich. If the rich just paid their fair share, this would all go away. We can argue about that. The rich has about 17% of total income, and they pay about 38% of federal income taxes. So we can argue about whether or not they already pay their fair share. But or maybe, how about this? If we could only make Warren Buffett pay more than his secretary, that would solve the problem. Now, again, I could spend a long time talking about why Warren Buffett really does pay more than his secretary, but my big problem with that type of thinking is it's too small. We need to have big thinkers in Washington, not any of this little penny ante stuff. We need someone who would think Huge. Let's not go. At any rate, so I propose, I have a model. I think that instead of raising taxes just a little bit on the rich, let's take it all. I mean, why worry about the tax increase? Why not have a 100% tax rate on every rich person in America? Okay, you probably could only do it once, but let's do that. That would solve our problem. Well, no, it wouldn't. In fact, if we actually took it at the top 10% of taxpayers, which is everybody earning $118,000 a year, and we took 100% of their income last year, we get about 24% of GDP. And the national debt is 102% of GDP. And if you actually include the unfunded liabilities of programs like Social Security and Medicare, we're talking about 500% of GDP. Obviously, you don't come close to solving the problem by taxing the rich. You're not going to get there at all. In fact, if you actually want to know what you have to do with taxes, if you wanted just to reduce the debt, not do away with it, let's just cut it about in half. Reduce it back down to the level where it was, where it's been in the last 50 years. You'd actually have to, starting next year, you'd have to have a 14% tax hike on everyone in America. And just to give you an idea, for a middle income household, that's earning the median income in America, which is $55,000 a year. So a family earning $55,000 a year would have to pay $1,700 more in federal income tax next year, and every year thereafter, in order to do this. If the Congress waits, and there's a possibility that they probably wouldn't pass this next year. So if they waited until 2021, you'd have to have an 18% increase in everybody's taxes, or a $2,200 increase on that middle class level. And if they waited 10 years, it becomes a 23% increase, or about $2,800, a little over $2,800 for a middle class family. That's a big tax hike of someone earning $55,000 a year. So you're not going to get there by raising taxes. You're just not going to tax yourself out of debt. There's no way you're going to get there. So if you can't solve the problem by bringing in enough money, then what's the other answer? We're going to have to reduce the amount going out. We're going to have to deal with the spending side of this and how to cut spending. So you have the other side of the debate. One side says, I'm going to raise tax a little bit of the rich. The other side of the debate says, we're going to cut spending. And then you suggest, okay, so what spending are you going to cut? And the crickets come out. But eventually you can get them to explain that, okay, they're going to find programs that are really unpopular and cut them. Because we're not going to cut anything that anybody actually likes, because then you won't vote for me. So find something really unpopular to cut. And so, okay, what don't people like? 4 and 8. Nobody likes 4 and 8, right? Okay, we'll get rid of 4 and 8, and it's 1% of federal spending. That's not going to do it. What else is there? Let's kill Big Bird. That was very popular. Mitt Romney wanted to kill Big Bird. We're going to do away with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and sell Sesame Street to the private sector. I think HBO actually bought them recently. That's moved now, but okay, we'll kill Big Bird. And what else? Oh, the cause of the day will defund Planned Parenthood, right? That's a big cause out there today. Well, Big Bird and Planned Parenthood combined are 1/10,000% of federal spending. Look, you're not balancing the budget by cutting the usual suspects and finding a bunch of unpopular programs. Waste, fraud, and abuse. Jimmy Carter was actually the first president who said he was going to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. And it's still there. So we're not going to get that. Look, this is where the money really goes. You want to know where we're spending our money? All domestic discretionary spending combined is 16% of federal spending. That's everything from the FBI, to the FDA, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education, you name it. That's all of it. You could get rid of everything there. And trust me, many a night I've dreamed of this. If you got rid of all of it, within a couple of years we'd be running a deficit again. That isn't going to do it. Defense spending, 15% of federal spending. I personally think we should be cutting defense, but very few candidates seem to agree with me on this. They all want to increase defense spending. But even if we trim that, it's not going to get us there. Interest on the debt, you can't touch that. We saw where that's going to go in the future, in fact. It's only going to get bigger. So, where does the money go? Social Security, 23% of federal spending. Medicare, 15% of federal spending. Medicaid, 10% of federal spending. In fact, those three programs alone are roughly half of everything the federal government spends. Quite frankly, there simply is no way, mathematically, that you could balance the budget and eliminate the debt unless you're willing to address Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Unless you're willing to take on entitlement programs, you cannot get down to the debt that we're talking about today. And it's only going to get worse in the future. If you want to look at where money's going to be spent over the next 10 years, that top purple line there, that's the government's health care program, Medicare, Medicaid, and now the Affordable Care Act. And you can see how much those are going to increase in spending. Those are going to get the trajectory of those programs is hot going up. Right underneath that, that's Social Security. Heading up, going to be more spending there. This bottom line here that's got such a high number, that's interest on the debt. That's that number I showed you before on the interest on the debt, how that was going to rise. See those things that are flat? That's discretionary and defense spending. We're not going to spend more money on those programs. We're going to spend more money on these others, on the entitlements and interest on the debt. We're eventually going to squeeze out all the other things government does just by doing those programs. In fact, one way to look at it is historically, the federal government brings in between 18 and 19% of GDP in taxes. And that's pretty much true regardless of tax rates. It seems to fluctuate around in there. Sometimes it might get up to 20, sometimes it drops down as low as 16, but it's generally in that 18 to 19%. And the federal government spends on average around 21% of GDP. And the fact that it spends more than it takes in is why we run budget deficits. If we keep it that 18 to 19% of GDP, in about 15 years, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the debt will consume every penny of that 18 to 19% of GDP that's brought into taxes. That means every penny in taxes that comes in will go to those three programs and interest. There won't be a dime left over for anything else that the federal government does, except those three programs and interest on the debt. We'd have to borrow money for everything else it does. So clearly you've got to address those programs. Let's talk a little bit about that. Social Security, biggest government program in the world. There's actually only about 10 countries, I believe, that actually have budgets bigger than Social Security. It's 23% of federal spending. And it's in debt. This year, the federal government ran a budget, Social Security rather, ran a debt of about $65 billion. That is, it spent about $65 billion more on benefits than it took in revenue. And that's never getting any better. That's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger in the future. This is just over the next decade, and within 10 years, that $65 billion has become $394 billion a year. Now, some people will tell you that don't worry about this because, yeah, okay, it's running a deficit right now, but there's this Social Security Trust Fund out there. Remember I mentioned that earlier in the Intergovernmental Death, Social Security Trust Fund. And we'll go to that Social Security Trust Fund, and we'll get all the money out of that, and that'll pay this. So, yeah, we're $65 billion short this year, but all we have to do is take it out of the trust fund and solve the problem. With one small caveat. There's no money in the trust fund. I mean, it's just a debt. And one way to look at this is that, look, most of Social Security's history didn't run surplus. There was no such thing as a surplus really until about 1990. And then from about 1990 to about 5 years ago, it ran up this $2.9 trillion surplus. And that 2.9 trillion has to go somewhere. The government has to do something with it. They can't put it in a cigar box and bury it behind the Treasury bill. So what they do with it is they buy these special issue Treasury bonds. And when they buy a bond, what happens to the money that's bought and used to buy the bond is it becomes general revenue of the federal government after that. And it spends on whatever the federal government does, whether it's building roads and bridges or invading Middle Eastern nations, it's gone. And what remains behind is the bond, which is sort of like an IOU, that someday they'll go to the general revenue of the government and say, give me the money back, and then we're fine. It's just a debt. It's a measurement of how big that debt is. Consider, if we had never run a surplus, if there was no such thing as a Social Security Trust Fund, what would happen this year when we had a $65 billion shortfall? If the government wanted to continue to pay all the Social Security benefits, it's got to come up with $65 billion, which it can do by raising taxes, or by borrowing it, or by cutting out the spending by $65 billion and transferring that money over to the Social Security system. That's the only three choices it's got. But we have a Social Security Trust Fund. There are those bonds. They're actually in a vault in West Virginia, right next to the Confederate war bonds. And they went out to the vault. They took out $65 billion worth of bonds. They went over to general revenue and they said, okay, give us $65 billion. The federal government said, okay, where are we going to get $65 billion? Well, we can raise taxes by $65 billion, we can borrow it, or we can cut other spending by $65 billion. Exactly the same choices that you face if there's no trust fund whatsoever. So what really counts is the cash flow within the Social Security system. And that is negative, and it's never getting any better. Frankly, the simple fact is, we have lied to you. You are not going to get the Social Security benefits that you were promised. Whatever benefits when you get your little statement that says what your benefits are going to be, that is a lie. You are not getting those benefits. I don't know what you're going to get, but it's not going to be what you've been promised. It's simply not going to be there. Which is unfortunate because even if you got them, it would be a lousy deal for you. Social Security is a giant Ponzi scheme. I mean, literally, it is a pyramid scheme in the sense that when you pay your Social Security taxes, that money is not saved for your retirement. It's not put away for you in any way. The money you pay in Social Security taxes is simply used to pay for people who are already retired. And when you retire, you then hope that the next generation behind you will pay into the system to support you in your retirement. Just like with a pyramid scheme, the people at the top of the pyramid are paid by the people in the second rung, and the people in the second rung are paid by the people in the third rung, and so on. And it works as long as you have ever bigger rungs down the bottom. Unfortunately, the Social Security pyramid is kind of inverted. I mean, we're living longer, it means more people are collecting. We're having fewer babies, that means there are fewer people paying in. So what you had in 1950, you had 16 people who were paying Social Security taxes for every person receiving benefits. Today, you've got 3. And by the time you get around to retiring, there's going to be slightly less than 2 who will have to support each one of you. And you can see, if you do that, that just like a pyramid scheme, the people at the top of the pyramid make out like bandits. Now, the very first Social Security recipient was a woman named Ida Mae Fuller from Ludlow, Vermont. She paid something like $18 in Social Security taxes, and then went on to live to be over 100. She did pretty well. Got back something like $28,000 in Social Security benefits. So it was a win. And frankly, everybody who retired years ago got back what they paid in Social Security with interest and a heck of a lot more besides. Retired this morning, you're going to get back about a 2% return on your Social Security taxes. And for you folks, boy, are you screwed. I mean, essentially, you might see a 1% return, but the fact is most of you will actually not live long enough to get back what you paid into the system, let alone any actual interest payments on it. And if we have to cut those benefits because you can't pay for them, it's only going to make the situation worse for you. You're only going to get a worse deal in the future. So Social Security is frankly, ripping you guys off every day. And that's the good news. See, I'm still being positive. Because Medicare is actually in much worse shape than Social Security. Social Security's unfunded liabilities around $26 trillion. Medicare is $40 trillion or more. And the reasons are very similar. There's a demographic problem, just like you had in Social Security, the fact that there, there's fewer and fewer people who are paying to support the people who are collecting Medicare retirement. And in fact, the healthcare costs going up. That also contributes. Now, you want to look at it this way. You take an average couple, and I would say you're earning the median wage. So both the husband and wife both earn $55,000 a year, so the couple earns $110,000 total on average. They'll pay over the course of their lifetime about $140,000 in Medicare taxes and premiums. So they pay their Medicare payroll tax, and they pay premiums when they get to be in retirement. And that total adds up to about $140,000. They will also collect about $422,000 in Medicare benefits over the course of their lifetime. That's about a $300,000 gap. You can't really, if you're running a business, make as much money, you sell your product for less than it costs to make it. And so, where we're at. In fact, it's actually a little bit worse than that. I mean, that actually makes it look better than it is. Another way to look at it is, 1975, there were 25 million people on Medicare. And it cost about just under $2,000 a year in order to take care of those people on Medicare, about $2,000 a year. Today, there's about 56 million people on Medicare, and it's now costing about $12,000 per year to take care of everyone. And this, by the way, again, it's all in 2015 dollars, so it's all inflation adjusted. And by the time you guys retire, we're going to be up to over 90 million of you on Medicare. And it's going to cost over $21,000 per year to take care of every one of you. You can see where the cost of that is going. More people, what you're basically doing here is losing money on every transaction and trying to make it up in volume. It's not going to get you very far. Medicaid, that's the third of it. And Medicaid, there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, of Medicaid. And I throw in this slide because I think people don't understand what it is. People think of Medicaid as a welfare program. People worry about, think about it, the typical Medicaid recipient is someone down in New Orleans, a mother with a couple of kids type of thing. Well, yes and no. If you actually look at who's on Medicaid, that is, about 2/3 of the people on Medicaid are either children or poor adults. Generally, they are that family, that poor family. We're talking about 2/3 of the people who receive Medicaid benefits, fit that stereotype. But if you look at where the money on Medicaid is actually spent, 2/3 of that money actually goes to seniors in nursing homes. It's disabled people and people who are just in nursing homes because they're aged. That's where the money is actually being spent. It's actually on elderly people in nursing homes. 2/3 of Medicaid spent. So basically, just like Social Security and Medicare, this is yet another program that's taxing you folks and giving it to people who are retired. I mean, the whole federal government right now is set up to take money away from young people and give it to old people. I mean, and Medicaid is essentially part of that. In fact, there's a whole industry out there that's lawyers and stuff. You can listen to the ads and find them, track them down. Lawyers out there whose entire practice is teaching seniors how to hide their money so that they can qualify for Medicaid. There was an ad in Washington, D.C. They were running the ad, and this lawyer comes out, and of course, it's got the big, booming, deep voice, and it's like, "Don't be a burden to your children. Let us put you on Medicaid." Okay. Be a burden to me. Anyway, so and again, if you want to look at where the expenditures are going on this, the bottom line, the top line is enrollment. We can see the number of people on Medicaid are going up. Part of that's the Affordable Care Act, part of that's aging again. And the cost is going up along with them because the cost of treating them is going up. So both in terms of the product and the number of people who are on the product, they're both going up. Well, none of this is surprising to people who are watching this, actually. Everyone knows these numbers. None of the stuff I gave you is a number that I created. Every number I gave you came from the Congressional Budget Office, the Office of Management Budget, or the Center for Medicaid and Medicaid Studies, CMS, which governs Medicare and Medicaid programs. They're all public numbers. Every member of Congress knows these numbers. It's absolutely no surprise to them. So they took a hard look at these. They dug in, looked at these numbers, and decided what we really needed to do, since we're facing this huge entitlement crisis, is create a new entitlement. So we threw in the Affordable Care Act. And the Affordable Care Act is basically another entitlement program that's underfunded. If you want to look at where that one's going forward, the bottom line on this is the new taxes in the program. Over the next 10 years, it'll take in about $1.1 trillion in new taxes as part of the program to fund it. And the top line is the spending under the program, which is about $2.4 trillion that's going to go into the spending there. And so we're going to end up essentially, over the next 10 years, running about $1.3 trillion in additional debt because of the Affordable Care Act. So you can take that for what it's worth. So what do we do? I've been giving you bad news. Let me give you a good answer. I don't have it. Because there isn't an easy. There is no magic bullet out there. We're not going to raise taxes by a little bit on the rich. We're not going to kill Big Bird. I mean, those things are not going to solve the problem. The only way to deal with this is to address entitlements, which are very politically popular. You can tell seniors about how immoral the debt is. You can tell them that they're taking advantage of you, and they don't care. They vote.
Thank God for the government.
Keep your hands off my Medicare. Keep the government out of my Medicare, as one of the great signs during the Affordable Care Act debate said. Don't keep your government out of my Medicare. But doing nothing's not an option. I mean, every year that passes, this gets worse. You saw where those projections are going. Right now we are at a little bit of trough. Things aren't as bad as they were. They're going to be bad in the future. If we wait, if we don't deal with it now, it's going to get real tough to deal with. And Ben Stein used to say, things that cannot go on forever eventually stop. Or my favorite from Maggie Thatcher was, the problem with the modern welfare state is eventually you run out of other people's money. We've run out of money. This is coming in for landing. And the question is, do you start now on a glide path that has a nice, slow, moderate, some pain, but at least a nice, slow trajectory? Or do you wait and come in for something that lands much faster? Because if we don't act, we know where it leads. And people think I'm exaggerating when I talk about the U.S. being. The U.S. does have advantage over Greece. We have a much bigger economy. We own our own debt rather than having being an actual European central bank. We control our own currency, things like that. But, let me give you one last slide. The bottom line is that, let's talk the top line. That is the last 25 years. The sort of purple line at the top. The last 25 years of Greek debt. If you just start today and you just traced it back to 25 years of how the Greek debt looked as a percentage of GDP. That's it. The bottom line is the CBO projection for our debt over the next 25 years of GDP. See any similarities? Look, the fact is, we've got a problem. Whether some people drink too much, some people gamble too much, some people smoke a little too much. Some of us wish we did all three more. But when you got a problem, you got a problem. And denying it doesn't make it go away. And the folks out there who are running for office, they are in denial. But the problem's not going away. And I'll give you one big reason why they can get away with denying it. Largely because you don't vote. The likelihood of someone's voting is roughly the equivalent of their age. 70% of 70-year-olds vote, about 30% of 30-year-olds vote. It's pretty much a straight line. As long as that's the case, Congress is more than happy to give benefits to 7-year-olds and give a bill to you. Because frankly, they don't care what you think. care a lot what the 70 rates think. So my advice is to get involved. I don't care what your political orientation is, but get out there and demand that people face up to the truth and answer you honestly. And when you ask them what they're going to do about their debt, and they tell you, oh, don't worry about it, I got a plan, I'm going to raise taxes a little bit on the rich, or oh, no, I got this little thing, I'm going to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. Remember this, they're lying. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Questions?
All right, so your presentation talked mostly about fiscal policy, so reducing spending, increasing taxes, but what about monetary policy? So my understanding is the Federal Reserve, if they wanted to at least have an impact on the deficit and debt, they either A, increase interest rates, and that's going to be slowly, but I think, let's just plug in, or two, monetize the debt. And I read an article last year, China was, that was the first time China was dumping treasuries on the market more than it was buying them. And so that maybe makes monetization more of an option. So what kind of effect does this subject area have on your
Yeah, I'll say I'm not a monetary economist. We got some very good ones, George Selgin and Mark Calabria at Cato, and I'm not one of them. So my ventures in the monetary policy are going to be pretty tentative here. I will say you're absolutely right. There is some evidence that the Chinese are not necessarily dumping treasuries, but they're moving particularly from 30-year to 10-year treasury in their purchases, which is a suggestion that they don't have as much confidence in our debt as they once did. We're still the best deal out there, but they are hedging a little bit by going to the shorter-term debt. And that may be the fear that we will ultimately sort of monetize the debt. I don't know that we would default, although that's certainly been the option for other countries in the Greek to the Argentine in terms of default. We have a lot. If we did that, wow, it would certainly make a mess of the world economic situation if we defaulted. I do think there's a little bit less, there's less confidence in the U.S. currency than there once was. But we're sort of in a good position as long as the rest of the world is in an even worse position. If the Europeans ever get their act together, if the euro sounds stronger, sounds good, people are going to notice this in a big way, and that's going to make a difference. We also have to look at the fact that there's this huge amount of money sloshing around in the economy right now. I mean, after we've had QE 270 or whatever it is, and so that there's all this money sloshing around out there. And so far, it's not been inflationary. You can get there is kind of a debate. People talk about underlying commodity inflation, whether that'll slip over someday or something like that. But for the most part, it's very little inflation, and that has to do with the fact that there's so little economic growth. There's not much velocity to them, essentially. But what happens if the economy starts to pick back up again, and inflation kicks in, then it looks like it's back to like a 1978 situation where they have to start taking that money out, raising interest rates rapidly. Could that, slam the brakes on and talk about Volcker-style recession type of thing? So, yeah, it does worry me somewhat. At the moment, I don't think Yeltsin's going to, or Yeltsin's going to raise interest rates at all. That's off the table, I think, for the next few years. The growth rate is just too slow. Yeah.
What do you say when people are, in response to this, increased debt and eventually a default? If we did default, it never did happen. But like we have the largest military, so it's kind of like, who's going to come and take it from us, or who's going to get what do you think in response when they're like, well, we have the largest military, what is anyone going to do to us? Like, seriously.
Well, I mean, it's not like they're going to take our assets. That's always amazing me when somebody says, "Oh my God, the Chinese are buying something." What? They're going to come over here and ship it back to China or something? No, who cares? Somebody, move on with it. But the problem with a default would be, first of all, it would shake up all the markets. All these investors would suddenly go rogue around the world. Banks would topple. We'd be back in Lehman. We saw the Lehman Brothers thing. Banks would go under everywhere. And so you'd have a huge economic growth crisis that would go on. I think it would set us back for years in that regard. Second, the problem would be after that, what do you do to get people to lend you money the second time? We'd have to pay enormous interest rates, because the risk factors that they put in there were so Greek style or Italian style interest rates where they charge 9, 10, 12% to lend them money.
So you don't think that, as like with our size of our military, with our country, has anything to do with this?
No, not so much the size. No, the size of the economy makes a big difference. The fact is that we're very resilient. I mean, as an economy, because it's just so huge, and we have sectors that, even in some sectors collapse, other sectors do well, and we're so diversified. We're not an export-dependent country in the same way that say Greece is or something. So we can do some things that other countries can't do. The problem is, I do see, you get to look a lot like the 1930s. The banking industry. I mean, we thought we had a banking problem with the housing market collapse. The entire bond market collapses overnight. And Larry Kopikoff, who's the head of the economics department at Boston University, predicts that. He's very concerned. There's a blinder sort of on bond investors right now. They're just ignoring this to some degree. He thinks one day they'll wake up and say, "My God, these bonds are worthless and dumb," and then we'll see it happen. So, yeah.
How would you respond to someone who argues that the federal government has an obligation to provide income insurance through Social Security for citizens?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, it doesn't do a very good job through Social Security. I mean, Social Security tries to do two things at once. It tries to be a welfare program and a retirement program, and ends up doing neither very well. I think you need to separate the two out in one way or another. I mean, why does it need to provide retirement insurance for Bill Gates? And do it, which does lead a poor job, and then doesn't provide income support for a lot of poor people. About 15% of seniors still live below the poverty line, like Social Security. So it's doing a bad job with both. If you want to argue about, responsibility for the government for redistribution, that's an entirely different set of arguments. But I would certainly say that Social Security is a lousy mechanism to do that by, if you want to do it. Be done outside of the retirement program. Yeah.
Why do you call it Department of Defense? Shouldn't it be Department of Offense?
Used to be Department of War, wasn't it one time? Probably a more accurate denomination. Yeah, I mean, the defense budget, the military budget. Without getting into the whole policy of it, an awful lot of it is designed to either prop up other countries. I mean, we basically subsidize the welfare states of Europe. About the only thing I think Donald Trump's ever been right on is probably the fact that NATO is, we didn't subsidize all the NATO countries. It's almost none. We pay about 4% of GDP for defense. There's, I think, 2 countries in NATO, Britain and one other, that bid about 2. Most of them are down 1 or even less in terms of that. So we're largely subsidizing them. We prop up South Korea, despite the fact that they have 5 times the GDP in North Korea, or 9 times the GDP in North Korea. They can certainly take care of themselves. I mean, it's so on around the world. Periodically we decide to invade this country or that, and it all costs money. I mean, none of that's for free type of thing. So yeah, defense, military spending is a huge burden. But we're still about 16% of federal spending, so it's still that's not what money is. Yeah.
Comes to main problem is healthcare because very much. And you think that the international charges too much for the hospital and they just pay for very expensive.
Sure. The profit margins in these companies is actually fairly small. In the pharmaceutical industry, I think the average profit margin is somewhere around 5-6%. Might be less than that. It's not a huge profit margin. I mean, the cost of production is small, but the cost of research and development is very high. It costs about $110 million for a drug to market for each drug. And you put $100 million of that in kind of dry well, so you've got to sort of recoup your costs, and you have to recoup them in a fairly short period of time before they become generic. So that's why costs, drive the cost. And there's a lot of degree that we tend to subsidize the rest of the world in that as well. There's a reason why half of all new patent medicines are patented in the United States rather than the lion's share of research and development healthcare. well, I mean, healthcare costs are being driven largely by a couple of different factors. One factor is that we can do a lot more than we ever could do before. We can keep people alive much better than we ever did before. This is everywhere in the world. There's, if you get sick, your chances of survival are a lot less higher than they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago. People don't die from heart attacks, the same way anymore, or cancer, or all these sort of things. That all cost money to do those sorts of things. And we all want to live forever. So we insist that they do everything that's humanly possible for us to do. Economists will also say that a lot of the problem with healthcare is that it's driven by a third-party payment system. And basically, you're not paying any of the cost for your healthcare. Of every dollar spent on healthcare, only the person consuming the healthcare only spends about 13 cents. All the rest is paid for either by the employer or by the government. About 50% of all U.S. healthcare spending is government spending, Medicaid, so it's largely third-party payment system. And if you don't have any interest in the cost, because you're not paying the cost, you're not being a good consumer in terms of driving down costs and getting better quality. So that has driven costs as well. And then just as an aging society, older people have higher healthcare costs. So the more of us that are old, the more that's going to cost in healthcare. Just imagine the number of people who are going to have Alzheimer's disease, for example, in the future, what that's going to cost. It's going to be gigantic.
Another thing driving medical costs up is restricting entry into the medical profession.
Yes.
This is why doctors make tons of money, whereas if it was open, they would make a lot less.
Absolutely, and I mean, not just the licensing of doctors, but it's also the fact that we don't let mid-level professionals do a lot of treatment. I mean, if you have one of these minute clinics, let's say, in a store, I mean, they're good, they're lower cost, but you still have to have a doctor sitting in the back room reading a newspaper while the nurse takes your blood pressure, because the nurse isn't allowed to take blood pressure without a doctor supervising her. Why? I mean, now she's going to kill you with the blood, with a sleeve or something like that. So it's dental hygienists cannot clean teeth unless they're in a dentist's office. There's things like that, and all these sort of regulations and restrictions that add to certificate of need laws that prevent hospitals from buying equipment or starting a new hospital that might compete and drive down costs in the area, the way competition does with everything else. Yeah.
Just another question about Social Security. So, since Social Security doesn't work very well either as a welfare program or income insurance, do you think, because people have probably saved less because they're expecting those Social Security benefits right later in life, would you say that the individual accounts where some of the funds go into a stock market rather than just into the trust fund, would that better provide for that income insurance?
Yeah, I mean, in two ways, it would be helpful in a couple of different ways. It would be helpful better as a retirement program, because it's actually a savings program and an investment program, and it earns an actual rate of return on the investment based on the capital, rates of return to capital, which historically in the U.S. have been about 6.5%. So in real terms, so you get a much higher rate of return, and it would be yours. It would be based on you. It wouldn't require the demographic dealings with anyone else. The second advantage to it is that it would belong to you. So you have a legal right to it, but you do not have the Social Security, which is entirely determined by what Congress wants to give you in terms of benefits. This would be what you paid in plus the return you get is yours, can't be taken away. Mm-hmm. Third is it becomes inheritable. I mean, if you die early, you can pass that on to your heirs. Whereas Social Security, if your kids are over 18, there's no survivor's benefits, nothing. Right. Deals with that. And it also, because of that inheritability issue, it deals with the inequity that exists because of life expectancy in the United States. I mean, essentially, the poor don't live as long as the wealthy. And how much you get from Social Security depends on how many checks you get. If you live to be 100, you get a lot of Social Security checks. If you die at 66, you're out of luck. And then basically, the poor don't live as long as the wealthy in the U.S. African Americans have shorter life expectancies at every age and every income level than whites. And men generally don't live as long as women. So essentially, Social Security is a system under which poor black men work to support rich white women. And so, that would be wiped out if you had a system of personal accounts as well. So, yeah, I strongly favor moving to that. Now, there's a problem with that because, again, you have this Ponzi scheme where right now when you're paying your Social Security taxes, that's not about your retirement, that's about grandma.
Right.
If I let you save your own money somehow, how do I pay grandma?
Right.
And so you have this transition financing issue that's expensive that we have to do.
Okay.
On the military budget, I think the US military, not defense, military is bigger than the next 15 or 16 countries all put together in
Correct.
terms of their military base.
That's
So
correct.
it's true, it's only 16%, but Ron Paul, if he were elected, he was talking about bringing most of the troops, all the troops home, and that was.
Yeah, I mean, how much of that I mean, yes, we're much bigger than the rest of the world. We do have responsibilities to some degree that the rest of the world doesn't have. I mean, well, I could argue, for example, I think we have an obligation in terms of keeping sea lanes open because of, for trade, I mean, and things like that, that we can't rely on Luxembourg's Navy, to keep the sea lanes open. So I do think we're always going to have a higher military budget than the rest of the world because I do think there are responsibilities that fall on us that the rest of the world can't meet, and that act in our benefit in terms of trade and things like that.
When you
But we can
attack-
certainly reduce it.
When you attack the Luxembourg Navy, you should give a trigger warning because I need a safe space now.
Yeah, all my talks should come with trigger warnings. Definitely, I'm not exactly politically correct on most things. Yeah.
Why do we have all these programs that don't work and don't go away? Is it because politicians are greedy or voters are ignorant? Like, whose fault is it?
Both. I mean, to some extent, voters. Every program benefits somebody, and they have a powerful interest in preserving that program. And most other people either don't know or don't care about that program. Economically, people talk about concentrated benefits and diffuse contributions. If we had a program that said, I'm going to take 1 cent from everybody in this room and give it all to you, you would have an interest in that money. And so you would be all in favor of it, and no one else is going to care about losing a penny. And that's why 94% of the people who testify before Congress are testifying in favor of more spending. Because they write their congressman, they show up, and they do all, they really put everything into it. And the average taxpayer doesn't really know or care or get involved in it in a particular way. And then you have the bureaucracy itself, which of course is trying to preserve itself, and they're trying to work towards it. So, they go out and they tell everybody how wonderful it is and it's doing all these great things, and most of the stuff is hard to follow because billions and trillions get tossed around and people's eyes glaze over. So it's a little bit of the average voter doesn't understand, and things are complex so that they can't understand. And part it's that the politicians, their constituency is not necessarily you. Let's put it that way. Their constituency is the people benefiting from that program. I think I can do a couple more. We get another one.
You place great emphasis on deficits, but I'd rather have,
Yeah.
say, government spend 4% of GDP and tax 2% of GDP, rather than tax and spend 90% of GDP. So the emphasis, I think, you should place more on, how much government do we have? Because if we had 90 and 90, we'd be, I don't know, USSR or something.
Yeah. Bill Freeman's great point was that the true cost of government is not taxes or debt, it's spending. And I think that is a very important point. I'd rather have a $1 trillion budget with a deficit than an unfunded obligated or a fully funded $4 trillion budget. That said, I think that first of all, the debt is a symptom of the disease, and you start with that. And second, I do think there's also something that's particularly immoral about spending money today and expecting generations yet unborn to bear the cost of that. I do think that sort of taxation without representation is particularly unfair. So I'm bothered by that to some degree. Now, if people wanted today to raise taxes to for a program, I certainly would oppose it. But at least I'm paying for the program I'm receiving. I get the program and someone else has to pay for it, then I think that's even worse. Just from a moral basis. Not from an economic basis, it doesn't make much difference. Because by raising taxes today, I'm actually going to lower their future wages and so on. They're going to be poorer in the future. So it's still taking away from them. But it just strikes me as a moral issue as opposed to an economic one, that it's worse to run the debt. Because they don't get a say.
I have one last question about Social Security, if you don't mind. So, do you think there's a place for a Social Security type program within each of the states where people's votes can act like more of a feedback mechanism than they can on the national scale?
I'm not sure about Social Security per se. And part of the problem with that is because of the mobility people have. How do you deal with people who work outside of the state part of the year, move back in, people who cross state, live in one state, and you can live here and have a job in Mississippi or whatever, and how do you translate all of that? It strikes me as very, very difficult to do that on a statewide basis. Social Security per se. But the idea that whatever income supports you should be at the state and local level as opposed to the national level, I strongly support.
That's our time. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for sharing.